The Road to Latin, Chapter 11, a portion of the grammar discussion. In this chapter, Helen Chestnut takes us for the first time into verb conjugations and principal parts, an abstract and boring but necessary aspect of your study of Latin. A verb conjugation is a family of verbs that forms its different tenses and persons and numbers in the same way. To conjugate a verb is to say or to write all of its forms in a given cluster. Principal parts are forms of verbs that must be memorized as part of your vocabulary. So far, we have met two conjugations. The first conjugation, for example, the verb porto, and the second conjugation, for example, the verb video. When we conjugate porto, we say or speak porto, portas, portat, portamus, portatis, portant. When we conjugate video, we say and or write video, vides, videt, videmus, videtis, vident. These endings must be memorized until you can recite them quickly and easily. And the practice of conjugating any verb by quickly and easily attaching these endings to the stem of the verb is something that you must practice until you can do it quickly and easily. Some things are the same between porto and video. Some things are different. Let's take a look. The things that are the same are what we call the personal endings. O, S, T, mus, tis, and T. Notice that both verbs have those. Those endings will tell you what person and number the verb is. For example, the NT tells us that the verb is third person and plural. The mus tells us it is first person and plural. And those are the same between both of these verbs. The O tells you that a verb is first person and singular. The S tells you, for example, that it is second person and singular. Again, those things are the same between these two verbs. Other things, however, are different. And the differences tell you what conjugation the verbs belong to. So notice that with porto, we have the A vowel before the personal endings. With video, we have an E. Notice also where the macrons are. The O is long, the second person singular E, the first person plural, and the second person plural E. Those are all long. Video, vides, videmus, videtis. But the E in the third person is short. Videt, vident. Similar pattern with porto. The O is long. The A of the second person singular is long. The A of the first person and second person plural is long. Porto, portas, portamus, portatis. But the A of the third person verbs is short. Portat, portant. Okay, so we see those differences. The differences tell us that porto belongs to the first conjugation and video belongs to the second conjugation. And the endings that go with each conjugation simply have to be memorized as such. So for example, you will memorize your first conjugation verb endings as o, os, ut, amos, atis, ant. You will memorize your second conjugation endings as I would recommend eo, ace, et, amos, atis, ent. Here is Helen Chestnut's explanation of what a conjugation is. The word conjugation is used here to mean a group or class or family of verbs that are inflected alike. This word inflected refers to the changes in form that are created by adding different endings to the verb. There are 4 such conjugations. We are learning the first 2. The verb porto belongs to the first conjugation. The verb sum does not belong to any of the conjugations. It is irregular. The verb video and habeo and dokeo belong to the second conjugation. This brings us to principal parts. In the past, when you memorized your vocabulary words, you only learned the third person singular form of the verb. For example, you memorized that portat means carries. From now on, however, we are going to memorize not the third person singular form of the verb, but rather the first person singular form with the O ending, the long O, and a second form called the infinitive. These are called the first 2 principal parts of the verb. Most Latin verbs have 4 principal parts. Helen Chestnut is easing us into this gently, however, by asking us just to memorize the first 2 for now. The reason why we memorize these first 2 forms is that the second principal part, or infinitive form, infinitive, tells us the conjugation of the verb. It tells us the conjugation because when we drop off the re ending, this form is pronounced portare or portare. When we drop off the re ending of any verb, what we're left with is called the stem, porta, para, orna. The vowel of the stem, this letter here, the long A, tells us that this verb is first conjugation, and the endings that we put on it will be the first conjugation endings. Porto, portas, portat, portamos, portatis, portant. Most of the verbs we've learned so far are first conjugation. Some, however, are second conjugation. For example, habeo, which we learned in chapter 2. So we see that the first 2 principal parts of habeo are habeo, habere. So when we drop off the re ending, we're left with the stem habe. The long E tells us this is second conjugation. So it's going to be conjugated with the endings habeo, habes, habet, habemus, habetis, habent. So from now on, we're memorizing the first 2 principal parts of all of our verbs. In this discussion, Helen Chestnut gives us a list of all the verbs we've learned so far, and she gives us a drill. I'm going to ask you to do this drill in your notebooks. It seems like busy work, but it's not. I would like to ask you please to write the first 2 principal parts of each verb, that is, to copy them exactly as they're given here in the book, and then give the English meaning of each one. So, for example, you will write ambulo, ambulare, to walk. Just copy it into your notebook. Shouldn't take you too long. Again, seems like busy work, but it's going to help you to memorize and to become familiar with the spellings and the sounds of each word. Please do say the Latin words as you write them. In the Ed puzzle, I'll ask you to say a couple of the forms in a spoken response. Here is Helen Chestnut's explanation of the infinitive form. The infinitive is made by adding re to the present stem, portare. Hence, if you know the infinitive, you can determine the present stem by dropping the re. It is customary to name a verb by giving the first person present, as porto, and to show its present stem, thus showing to which conjugation it belongs, by giving the present infinitive. These two forms are the first and second principal parts of a Latin verb, porto, portare. In the vocabularies hereafter, these two forms will be given. Grammatically, the infinitive form is what we call a verbal noun. It is usually translated into English with the word to, which here is a helping verb. So in English, strictly speaking, to walk is the whole form of the verb, but it can act like a noun. It can be the subject or the direct object, that is the doer or receiver of action in a sentence. So for example, in English, we might say, I like to walk. I is the subject or doer of the action in English. Like is the verb. To walk is the direct object or receiver of the action. How would we say this in Latin? Idiomatically, rather than like, we'd probably want to use the word delectat, which means to make happy. So we would say something like to walk, ambulare, makes me, me in the accusative case, makes me happy, delectat. Or we might say desidero, I want to walk, or I want to see. So we might say, for example, videre to see, desidero, I want, and then we might give to see a direct object or accusative. Let's say, I want to see my friend, amicam. Of course, we can make that masculine with amicum. Amicam meam. Videre, to see. Desidero, I want to see my friend. So that's how the infinitive form works. It can act like a noun, and we will see it in one of the translation drills in this chapter, which we'll go over in another lesson. Gratias et valete.